Good afternoon and welcome to Driving Continuous Delivery with Value Stream Management, a health system CIO Media Inc. production sponsored by Tasktop. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. My name's Anthony Guerra. I'm the editor in chief of Health System CIO, and I will be your moderator today. We're looking forward to your participation. You can send in your questions or comments at any time in the Q&A box, and we'll take them later in the program. And we'll have a little one question audience poll later on. Nice way to view the screen. Click on the top center, get it in side-by-side mode. Then you can adjust the divider to get the video boxes and the slides the size you want them, and it should say speaker view in the top right-hand corner. Just so you see how we're going to spend our time today, we're going to go about 35 or 40 minutes with our main panel discussion featuring Mike Restuccia, SVP and CIO at Penn Medicine, Neil Ganguly, VP of IT at Hackensack Meridian Health, and Mick Kirsten, founder and CEO with Tasktop. So let's jump right in. Mike, let's start with you. Can we get an overview of your organization and your role?
Thank you, Anthony, and good afternoon to everyone. Sure, I'm Mike Restuccia, Senior Vice President, CIO of Penn Medicine. Penn Medicine is the integration of our health system, the University of Pennsylvania Health System, along with our Perelman School of Medicine. So we're positioned well to integrate those discoveries and advancements in research into our delivery of care, patient care systems within our hospitals and ambulatory clinics. So thanks for having me.
All right, thanks, Mike. Neil?
I'm Neil Ganguly. I'm the Vice President of IT at Hackensack Meridian Health. I'm a member of the IT senior leadership team. My specific responsibilities are over our IT PMO, our IT intake process, and our IT hospital site managers. Hackensack Meridian itself is one of the largest health systems in New Jersey. We've got 17 hospitals, over 9 campuses, and 500 ambulatory care locations around the state, as well as the full range of other healthcare services from behavioral health through long-term care and ambulance services, fitness centers, et cetera. And then on top of that, we have a relatively new medical school and a research division that's all just sort of under 3 or 4 years old. And Hackensack Meridian itself is really just under 5 years old. So a relatively new health system that's come together and is rapidly growing.
Very good. Thanks, Neil. Mick?
So I'm Mick Kirsten. I'm the founder and CEO of Tasktop and the author of the Project to Product book, which was one of the books defining this new discipline of value stream management, which I think we'll be talking about some today. And yeah, I've worked very closely with senior leaders in healthcare organizations who are undergoing digital transformation. So where more and more of the care, the well-being experience actually comes from digital offerings, in addition to, of course, all the systems and operations that are being run. So yeah, very excited about this topic on how we basically accelerate transformation and innovation around digital and software in healthcare. So.
Excellent. All right, Neil, let's start with you. Where do requests for improving your software come from, and what are the formal mechanisms?
So for us, the requests can really come from a range of different sources. For large or strategic kind of projects, they come through our planning process, the organizational business planning process, and then they come through into our IT intake process for evaluation, prioritization. Things that are underneath that level, sort of the mid-size to smaller size kind of initiatives, can come from our sites through our IT site managers or directly through our application teams in more of an organic fashion. Those kind of things come through often, meetings or planning meetings that are held at those various levels. And ultimately, though, all of that filters through into our IT intake process for evaluation and prioritization.
Okay, very good. Mike?
Similarly, we utilize our project management office to be that central point for all intake of projects defined as estimated to be 80 hours or more in effort, combined effort amongst the teams. But as we know, there are many, many requests that come in that are less than 80 hours, and we call those service requests. And service requests can go right directly to a director level individual on our team, and then be prioritized and addressed accordingly. But those two mechanisms, larger scale, as mentioned, the planning process drives projects. Projects come in through the PMO, 80 hours or more. Anything outside of that comes in through the director level.
Mick, what are you seeing out there?
Yeah, so I think I'm seeing this interesting shift where I think that kind of work intake doesn't fundamentally change, right? In the sense that you've got these larger projects, initiatives that come in. The PMO is a key part of that. Now, in terms of when the goals of writing project to product was to actually help organizations see, not just that new work, not that project intake work, but to see all work that's needed to accelerate bringing offerings to market. So the thing that I realized is, things I noticed, and this discrepancy between tech companies and the way that they manage their intake and flow of work and value delivery, and the way that more traditional organizations manage the flow of delivery. In the more traditional project-oriented model, a lot of the work being done was not visible to leadership. So just as an example, work on technical debt. We know that a lot of our platforms are using, there's some legacy databases and back office systems and these kinds of things. And developers, if we actually, I spent a lot of time measuring the flow of value and measuring for project to product for the book. It was 308 organizations' value streams that we measured. And we noticed that there's this work, there's this intake of all this planned work that's being, as you just described, carefully prioritized and managed. And when you actually look at the output of the work, what's actually being delivered to the customer, that only a portion of that was that planned work. So where did the rest of the capacity go? Was it all wasted? Was other work being done? And so I realized in measuring these value streams that there were these other kinds of work that were just invisible. So for example, developers, spending time and some of your contractors and some other IT practitioners dealing with technical debt, dealing with those legacy systems. That work was not visible, was not being planned, it was actually not showing up on the project plans. And so what I did is introduce something for, I think the overall idea is that value stream management allows you to see and manage all work and to actually understand what I created with the flow framework is this notion of flow metrics, where at a conceptual level, you can track both the flow of those projects, which the PMO is pretty good at today, but the flow of things that don't show up, such as, and you just mentioned this, Mike, that so incidents and service requests and outages and those kinds of things. Well, how much is being invested in each value stream on outages versus project work versus the planned work? So the idea of the flow framework is that there are actually 4 flow items that encapsulate all work, all capacity that's being used, all investment across your value streams. And these are features, net new things that you're adding. That's coming really through that project work. Those things that take, will take, say, over 80 hours. Defect, that's all the rework that's necessary. And that's all the quality work that's needed. That tends not to be prioritized by the PMO because they don't have anything to prioritize until something goes wrong. Risks. And risks are sort of a key contribution of the flow framework because software, as it's running our hospitals, it's running our services and our offerings. Risk work encapsulates all security, data privacy, regulation, compliance work, and we need to make that first class as well. It can't happen that mid-quarter some audit happened and all of a sudden the teams can't get any of that project work done. Right? Because we didn't properly plan for the outcome of an audit or the unplanned work that comes out of an audit or something of that sort, or we didn't properly invest in security or data privacy, and it created too big a surface area for security incidents and threats. And then finally, there's debt work. So it's features, defects, risks, and debts. And the idea is that we elevate all this work. We can see all this work in our value streams. And we can see, for example, how much are we investing in quality versus that project work that's going to make our associates or our customers or other stakeholders' lives easier. So that's really been my approach, is to help at a conceptual level, and the flow framework is just out there. It's open, it's Creative Commons licensed. You can check it out on flowframework.org. Is to help elevate the same kind of discipline and rigor that we have for some of that project work for all the other kinds of work that's actually, turns out, for most organizations, takes more than 3/4 of the capacity of their value streams, which is why everyone's so frustrated the project work doesn't get out quickly enough. So.
Right.
Well, let's talk about that. Neil, let me get your thoughts. Do you feel like there's a lot of effort that's being expended by the IT department that isn't captured and communicated as value? So we're saying we did A, B, and C, and people go, "Well, that's great, but you got a lot of people." But you're like, "Well, we did a lot more than that, but it's hard to explain it."
Yeah, I mean, we tend to bundle that into whether you want to call it overhead or maintenance as we look at how we allocate our staff. And so a large portion of their time goes to maintaining the environment, whether that is resolving technical issues or upgrades and enhancements that are scheduled, et cetera. And so we don't really actively communicate that other than to say, when we say our bandwidth is X, it is the remaining portion of the time that is available after all of that required work is accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
And so in our organization, they understand that, but you're right. I mean, they look at the size of our staff. We have about 575 budgeted FTEs at HMH for IT. And, it's I think it's valuable for us to be able to demonstrate more clearly what goes into that bucket of maintenance. We don't necessarily actively do that.
Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, utilizing the concept of run and maintain is takes up a fairly significant portion of our resources, and that's just the way it is. And what you have remaining, you can put on new projects. What I do think is important, though, is we do go to the granular level with our employee base to understand what they're planning for each week and utilize whatever tool it might be, project server or whatever, to understand what's going forward on their docket, and then looking back historically to see where they've been spending time and then how we can make adjustments. I think the key to it is, in this day and age, every project requires multiple disciplines in order to successfully complete. And so you're only as strong as your weakest link or least capacity oriented link. And that's really the value of our project management office, to align the resources. So if you need a developer, you need an integration resource, you need a project manager, and you need a testing analyst. If you have 3 of those available, you're probably not moving forward on the project. You need 4 available at the same time, and then in alignment with operations, which in today's day and age is more difficult than ever with trying to address every challenge associated with COVID that exists out there. So our clinical partners are enormously stretched. And we've become further stretched also during these times. But being able to track and use data in order to plan your capacity and then delivery with expectation setting is an ongoing challenge. But I think successfully, most organizations are able to muscle through it with some rough edges.
Mick?
Yeah, I think kind of I'll reflect on Mike's points first, right? I think it really is, and the data's there, right? The data's in your product server, the data's in your agile tool, like a tool like Jira, Azure DevOps, your service desk, ServiceNow. So the data is the data's in the tools that are being used to manage the work. So, and this was some of the realization that I had. And so, Mike, some of what you've done is actually, the fact that you're looking at that data historically, you're understanding that some of the biggest challenges are actually cross-functional. I think those are the kinds of insights that are so key. And in the end, and Neil, relating back to what you said, in the end, there's what I saw, everyone's allocating this much capacity to maintenance work, right? I realized that, it's common to allocate 60, 70, 80% of capacity, depending on what industry you're in, depending what the nature of the technologies you were working with. All this capacity was allocated to maintenance work. And coming from open source, coming from software startups that just didn't, and working with large technology companies, that just didn't seem right to me. I said, like, why are we allocating 70% to maintenance work? Can we look at that data? And can we look at actually what would it take to have 50% capacity going to net new initiatives and net new work and net new business value? And I know in my own company, because working with large companies in healthcare and other sectors, I realized that there's a ton going into maintenance work. And then I realized when I was looking at our own product value streams, our own software offerings, I would get, within our company, I'd get very unhappy if I saw any product value stream dipping below 50% net new work. So net new business value. And especially for some of the offerings that are sort of newer products, if it's below 80%, I'd get very unhappy. So yeah, I basically asked myself, how can we shift away from this? And I think the key thing, so the key insight for me is that if we could, Mike, back to your point, this is really around these, what I consider these cross-functional product value streams, right? These things take more than a team. Sometimes it's a lot of outsourced or contractors that you have working on these things. It becomes very cross-functional. But if we could just define those cross-functional team of teams levels value streams and measure where that maintenance work is going, we could actually unlock some insights, like some of those historical insights that you talked about, Mike. So the way that and for me in the end, because this is a form, software is a form of manufacturing process, and every manufacturing process is about finding the constraint. That's a different manufacturing process because it's a creative one. It's not creating widgets. It's actually creating intangible artifacts and cool features and things that deliver value to customers and clients and associates and clinics. But if we could look at where for each product value stream, each part of your portfolio, if you could actually look at what the bottleneck was, and you could see, okay, the bottleneck is actually in this legacy system. The bottleneck is in the fact that people can't get, or the developers can't get the right access to the right kind of data. And if we could say basically, well, we're always going to invest effort into where that bottleneck is, because that bottleneck is what's causing all that. And this is the interesting thing, is it's those bottlenecks that tend to cause all that maintenance work. And so, for example, what we recommend to our customers and what we do internally ourselves is every single release, every quarter, we prioritize amount of technical debt reduction. So where the teams get to remove the things that impede their flow of value so they can get more project and feature work done. However, teams like to build software just sometimes for software's sake. So every technical debt reduction has to basically come with a hypothesis of how it's going to reduce future maintenance work or accelerate the flow of net new value to the customer. And then we check that every month, every release. It's a bit like that process that you're talking about, Mike. But basically, to do that, you extract all the data, you look for what the bottlenecks are, and then you can really start moving that needle from 80 or 70 or 60% maintenance work and shifting it over to the majority of your capacity going to net new business value. So,
Mike, I'd like to hear your thoughts on what Mick's saying.
Yeah, I think the challenge, we have most organizations have structure in place. We're by nature, we're analytical type folks, right? We grow up with, generally speaking, computer science, finance backgrounds. We're analytical in nature, whatever side of the brain.
Yeah, right.
Is, that's what we are. And so we believe in structure and we believe in organization. Where we get hit on challenges is when that unforeseen priority jumps into the mix. And so you have 4 or 5 people on a project, and then suddenly you need to pull out 1 or 2 to go to that special hot project. And I looked at the participant list, and I know there's some present and former CIOs on the call also. And, we've all been there. It happens all the time. And that sort of sets you off, and now you have to be nimble and flexible. And again, I look at our processes and I look at our PMO to help with that balancing act. The other thing I would say, and why I mentioned the former and present CIOs, is prioritization is critical in meeting the goals of what Mick is indicating. You need to have clear direction. Yeah, you need to have unwavering support from your leadership. And if there is, one of these unforeseen projects thrown in, it's at the expense of something else so that you can keep this funnel moving. Mm-hmm. The worst thing we have ever done, to our staff is saying, well, you need to do this unforeseen project and keep the rolling on this other one and this other. It'll burn you out. It's not effective leadership. And the relationship with senior leadership is so important. And, I've been here a bunch of years now, and I never really understood that. So for those that are thinking of being in the CIO role, you got to have the unwavering support of your executive team. Otherwise, it just doesn't work.
So Neil, I think what Mike's saying is you have to have the support of your executive team not to shove work into the IT system that at that time cannot handle that additional work. When it's not, we'll do this instead of that, you're going to do this and that, like he said.
Yeah, right.
How much is that a part of your job, making sure the system, so to speak, doesn't get overloaded with work?
I think that's the job of all of us at the IT leadership level. And it is, I believe, one of our greatest challenges, because in growing organizations, I'm sure Penn Medicine is growing rapidly, we're growing rapidly. The demands are not neatly packaged in these 1-year planning horizons or 2-year planning horizons. Things are evolving rapidly. And for us, our key challenge is, how do we maintain that awareness of the pipeline with our senior leadership, meaning not senior IT leadership, but senior operational leadership, so they can make those value judgments that Mike has talked about, where when that emergency comes in, what's the thing that has to give, or what's the thing they're willing to give to allow us to manage the pipeline effectively. And we're emerging, evolving as a PMO. We're sort of young as a 4.5-year-old company, kind of bringing this all together. So it's a work in progress for us. We do have the support of our senior leadership, and we're very fortunate that we do have that. But we also have a huge demand in terms of projects that are on dock, and it is just an ongoing challenge to keep that moving. And to what Mick was saying about the trying to reduce the technical debt and the maintenance part, I mean, I'd love to hear more about thoughts on how that gets done, and even from Mike, how that might get done, because what I see is the weight of the maintenance on some of these larger systems like our EMRs and our ERP systems is such that I'm not sure how we get from 70% run and maintain down to 50%. I think it's a great goal, but I'm not clear on how I see that happening. I think we're still working with that 35% capacity for new projects as what we have.
Mick?
Yeah, so I think kind of few things there to touch on. I can actually, and there's a question from the Q&A, which will involve me giving a very brief plug for Tasktop's offerings, because and then I can actually use some of what we found through our offerings to address this topic. But yeah, Tasktop creates software. It's a software platform that allows you to define and then measure flow in your software value streams across however complex your tool chains are. So sort of the ERP for software delivery, since you're bringing up ERP. So what we've done is we've been, and this has been interesting because we're talking about this topic of prioritization and overload that Mike's bringing up. Over the past year, so basically since the start of the pandemic, we measured large and mid-sized organizations' software value stream, so we understand the flow of work. We understand the exact ratio of how much is going into this maintenance and this rework, how much into unplanned work, how much is actually being proactively invested in technical debt and project and new initiative work, and so on. And we've seen for a lot of large organizations, so we're as one of the flow metrics that you'd see on the flow framework is flow load. And then flow load is how much work has been put on a set of teams, a product value stream. It's a work in progress metric. We know from manufacturing, you put too much work in progress onto an assembly line and throughput goes down, not up, if you overload things over 80%, because of some of what we're saying on this panel here, which is it's that unplanned work coming in. There's no more capacity for it. Once overload happens, thrashing starts happening. So on we've seen this as basically across organizations, the amount of flow load that's too high for teams to handle is because it's just become endemic across our customer base, to the point where this was actually stated publicly on my podcast, on the Project to Product podcast, that when the transformation leaders at Lloyd's Bank, he said that post-COVID, he saw their flow efficiency, this is the ratio of where things are being actively worked on to stalled and waiting, where wait states are the kiss of death for any value stream, drop down to 1%, right? Where I panic if I see our value streams drop down to below 50 or 60%. And that actually happened because of all this overload on the teams with all this new work coming in, all this urgent work coming in, and then all of a sudden even less is coming out. So I think what Mike said is one of our, the key weapons against that is that business level prioritization. But it becomes very difficult when you don't actually have a very clear sense of capacity, especially capacity for different kinds of work, or how much of that unplanned work will come in. So I think that, the key thing that I've learned through this is that basically having a data-driven view, and this is all back to, yes, us being kind of, probably more analytical, as you said, Mike, on this panel, and data-driven, but a data-driven view of what's our current capacity, when we actually invested into reducing some of the technical debt of the EMR system, did things improve? Did they not improve? And just continually having visibility into what's happening. And one of the main things, by the way, that I've seen as an effective navigation and as an effective way of addressing what's happening is ruthless prioritization and reduction of work in progress on value streams. Teams are being asked to do too much, and they're getting less done as a result. So that's one of the data-driven outcomes that we've actually been able to establish. And it's just the case across most organizations. Not everywhere. You might have some greenfields team working over here and on a new digital web app or something or mobile app or something of that sort, and they not yet inundated with all that, basically all that maintenance, all the context switching while they're trying to bring those new projects and initiatives to market. So.
Well, Mick, maybe can you touch a little bit more on Neil's question about how you actually get the maintenance costs, so to speak, down, if they're 50, 60, 70%, it makes me think of being house poor, right? You buy a house and all the money's going to your mortgage and you can't do much after that.
Yeah. No, and I think as you said, Neil, it's not easy, right? So this is these are complex systems, a lot of different integrations, a lot of potentially customizations, again, depending how your business works. So I think we just have to accept it's not easy, and then it's not easy for the teams doing this because again, they're being asked to handle new work while dealing with all of that, everything that's there in these systems today. So I think we need to accept that. And then where I've seen it done successfully is, to make sure that you've got a data-driven way of finding your bottleneck and applying resources to that bottleneck. So for let's say you've got, I am working with a customer who's doing a transformation of their EMR systems. So they've been able to look at where are the most wait states on work that's going through these EMR systems. So imagine that project work that you're prioritizing with a PMO, where does it get stuck? Does it get stuck on an external partner? Does it get stuck on, on some part of the legacy system? Where does it get stuck? Because if we can just actually reliably see, and this is where the PMO can help, if the PMO has a way of looking not through the rear view on what things were off track or delivered late, by looking through the windshield and seeing, okay, well, when we do this kind of work, it's probably going to get stuck here. And this is really where we need to augment capacity or reapply capacity, but to understand again, and it's really the interesting thing that I've noticed as well is it'll be different for different parts of your portfolio, right? For the EMR system, it could be a very different bottleneck than for some of your other systems. So I think that's really the key thing, is to have a measurable, reliable way of measuring flow, and then understanding where the bottleneck is as a business and technology level, because sometimes it'll be that it's incredible actually how often the bottleneck will be outside of the development teams or of the technology teams, because they're always stuck waiting on something coming, some new requirement or security review or something of that coming in. So it's to really understand where the bottleneck is, always invest resources at that bottleneck, and then to measure that, whether that worked, whether that increased flow. So no silver bullet, but again, that same approach that worked for manufacturing supply chains, applying that to your technology.
So Mike, go ahead.
Anthony, I think you said up front, how do you change the percentage? And, one of the simplest ways I think would be just change the denominator, right? Add more people. And, then, your ratio adjusts, but we happen to work in healthcare where the budgets for IT tend to be 3 to 4% of net patient revenue, unlike finance, unlike banking, and others. So, Mick hit the nail on the head, and I think you need to address the issue at the root, and the source, which is ruthless prioritization. And right up front, be able to have the tools available and the visibility to leadership as to this is what we can commit to and this is what we can't, recognizing that there's going to be some unforeseen things that take place. And so that to me is mission critical. I think the second thing is, Nick, you hit on it, you commit to the initial deliverable, and then there's 9 more iterations downstream of enhancements that are required. And that is either has to be built into the plan or it becomes a separate project. Again, expectation setting. You've delivered 80% of what they really wanted because they didn't know they needed the other 20. But now how do you help them get there? And then the third thing I would say, and this is something that I've shared with many others, is you consistently and constantly have to be reminding leadership of your successes. And we put together every 2 years, a benefits realization booklet that looks at our, I'll call them marquee projects. We picked 20 to 25. And then what was the expectation of value? And then what was delivered? And we publish it. We put it in a nice printout, bind it, and we leave it in leadership's suites so that because people forget. It's, I'm sure, Neil, you've had 5 big successes in the last 60 days, but they only remember the last one. And it's just the nature, and it's the same, I'm sure, on the clinical side, on the administrative side. It's just human nature at this point. But, running at 3% net patient revenue sort of puts you behind the 8 ball and forces that ruthless prioritization, which I think you well call out.
Neil, so it's interesting, right? So if the worst case scenario or the ultimate point you don't want to be at is to say no, right? Nobody wants to say no. You don't want to say no. It's always what we always hear IT leaders saying, don't say no, say, tell me what you need and we'll figure out how to help you, right? So that's the last case scenario. That's what we don't want to say no. But if we want to be in a position to say no, if we have to address some of the things Mick's been talking about, which is, one, you have to understand your capacity, right? So what are we capable of? What is the body of work that the system is capable of? And then also what Mick was talking about is know your bottlenecks. So what is the body of work we can accomplish? And then are there any points that are holding us back, that are making us not operate efficiently? So it's almost like you have to get your house in order. You have to know what you're capable of and make sure you're running efficiently. Then what Mike was saying about ruthless prioritization. And then it's, after all that is done, if they're going to load on work that'll break the system, you have to have the courage to say no. Does that make any sense?
It does. And I think Mike, I'm sure, faces this all the time too. We say no a lot. We have to, because our resources are constrained. And when you have leadership support, they understand that. Doesn't mean everybody loves it. And certainly within leadership, people have their, I'll call them pet priorities that may not have gone through the normal channels that we've established for structure. Those sort of surprises that come up consistently. I don't want to say on a particular cycle, right? But those are the things we have to react to. And the prioritization is such an important part of that. We do struggle with that in growing organizations, though, because the growth is such a driver of business need that they need to then be able to translate that back to what the IT support requirements are. And we have to show them that, look, this is our capacity. And if you want to go above the capacity, either to Mike's point, you've got to ramp up and add more people. And that doesn't have to be permanent. It can be contractors or whatever is necessary to get that job done. But that's part of our task. And we do communicate that. that this is our capacity. If you want to go above, here's what it'll take for us to then do that. And sometimes we get the approval to do that. Other times they have to make business decisions where they say, okay, we're going to wait, prioritize this later in the cycle than when you have capacity. But it is our ongoing challenge.
So, Mike, it's interesting. We talked about your reports and the reports you deliver to demonstrate and to communicate the value that you feel you're delivering to the organization. Well, Neil's talking about leadership support, and what that means is trust, right?
Sure.
That means that the leadership trusts you, that when you talk about capacity, they can believe you. And it's not like, oh, Mike's got another 20, 30%. He's always just covering his butt so he can come through in the end to be a hero, right? I mean, a lot of that is trust between you and the other leadership. So when you say, hey, we're at capacity, they believe you.
For sure. And it's why you need to be an integral part of the executive leadership team, why you need to be there through thick and thin, and why you need to be transparent in your team's activities, successes or non-successes. And to the point of saying no, I think we all say no, but I've been coached by folks a lot smarter than me to make sure it's just not me saying no. And that's where, again, to your point, Anthony, the collaboration with senior leadership. We have a project prioritization committee that looks at burning platform topics, and we say they need to be addressed. And then the concept of corporate IS being a free good to the general population, that's been the thought process. But if that's the thought process, then everybody just reaches out and wants a piece of it. There needs to be that funnel and that prioritization and that collective effort. And we're spending a lot of time on prioritization and structure, but I think Mick's point is there are methods to eliminate some of the bottlenecks once you get into the project, so you can have things flow through faster. And I think one of the methods that we found, and it's particularly in our software development team, is as everyone's doing, more of an agile approach, which is every 2 weeks we're going to deliver something. So it's not the final product, but at least you see we're making some progress along the way. It might be a flow chart, it might be a PowerPoint, it might be a design, and it keeps the ball rolling and keeps people engaged. And I got to tell you, I know there have been methodologies all developed throughout my career, and I just roll my eyes, here's yet another, but this really works. And I'm surprised at how engaged our end user base has become when they can see something every few weeks versus waiting until 4 months when the project was due to be done.
Mick?
Yeah, I think that's exactly key, right? Is in the end, I do want to start actually, Anthony, with your point, because I think there's just this tension that all of us deal with, right? Is that we're not wanting to say no, we're having to say no, and it's saying no to the business and then in the end to the customer. And having, for most organizations, having an accurate view of capacity of what exactly the capacity is going to be for the next, for the next release, for the next cycle, is extremely difficult. So the reason these agile methodologies, and as you say, Mike, they've been popular is because when you've got something as complex as dealing with legacy systems, dealing with the complexity of VMR systems, and wanting to deliver sort of new innovation and new work, it's for the PMO, for everyone. It's extremely difficult to understand go forward capacity. So, and I think we do have I think again, this still the ruthless prioritization needs to remain, right? Because I think most of us know intuitively we're over capacity, and we see that. The question is what can we say yes to? How much new unplanned work will come in and such? So the whole point of these agile methods, and in the end, the flow framework is really just a business layer above the agile framework. That's all it is, right? Is it's a way of elevating. Agile frameworks tend to be very, they're critical to how teams prioritize, because teams have to prioritize at a very fine-grained level. And they really should be prioritizing on business priorities, on North Stars that are set on them for customer results and outcomes and clinics and the like. So all really the flow framework says is, okay, we need to apply that same thing that works, that you're seeing work, Mike, for your agile teams and your customers who are seeing faster feedback. We need to apply that to the planning cycle.
Yeah.
We need to understand, and we need to have this 2 week, this 1 month, and this quarterly way of planning being very iterative around our capacity. Because as I think that, Neil, Mike, as we've all said here, is unplanned things will happen. They cause all these overloads. So if we can just get more iterative and more data driven on what our capacity is, we will actually know that when we reduced work, oh, we actually had a bit more capacity than we expected. Maybe we can actually load up the teams a bit more. And again, it's just applying those same agile principles. And I want to, as part of this, I want to relate, Mike, you said celebrating successes. I think this was when I actually wrote the book, I think I sort of underappreciated how critical that was. One of the most powerful things I've seen in terms of getting the, because when you're having to say no to leadership, again, it's painful. When you're having to say no to business partners, it's painful. We all want to deliver more and not be the bottleneck. And I actually think it is a bit more, to your point, of the proportional IT investment. It is a bit more painful in healthcare, is what I'm seeing, than like you said, in financial services, where the IT budgets are just a massive proportion of revenues, or in some other domains. But I think that, so the key thing is that, given we've got sort of effectively, you're starting with, and organizations are growing, so you'll have some growth, but basically some of the most powerful stories I've heard is where a part of the IT organization was able to say, we would be able to bring that, so that, let's say that 80 plus, those new initiatives that you project work, we reduced the time to market of that by 20% last quarter. As soon as you say, as soon as that success story goes to leadership, that's becomes transformational, because everyone wants to know, how did you do that? What did you do? We didn't unlock all those hires, we didn't give you budget for all those hires, that you said that that were needed yesterday. But how did you do it, and what did you do? If you can actually position sort of successes in the terms of those, Mike, like you said, customers are now more engaged and more happy because they're getting things more quickly. They're actually part of the feedback loop, the design loop of these new products. If you can measure how flow improved through some of the initiatives that you took, whether it's with existing staff and cost structures, or with new, making the case for new budget, I think celebrating the successes in terms of accelerated flow and how that's driving business and customer outcomes is what's so powerful, and it is what gets the organization thinking the right way, in terms of empowering technology and IT leaders to make the right decisions, allow the teams to make the right decisions to drive more outcomes. So I think measuring flow, celebrating improvements in flow, highlighting the problems. In the end, if you've got a massive bottleneck on a legacy system, senior leadership needs to understand what that is. Right, people need to stop ignoring it, because if that's what's, or a contract relationship or a partnership, that's putting a lot of strain on the teams. I think both elevating the successes and the bottlenecks is a recipe for success. So,
all right, very good. We're going to do Ask a Co-Panelist. Mick, I'm going to let you go first. You have a question for one or both of your co-panelists.
Yeah, so I guess as you look ahead, how are you? And I think the point of the seat at the table that you made, Mike, how have you been doing that? How have you been getting leadership engaged? And I think the booklets are one thing. That's good. That's good that you're distributing. But in terms of the actual planning, and as you look ahead for the rest of 2021, what are you doing to keep leadership actively engaged in some of your initiatives, some of your challenges, and some of your successes?
Yeah, I think I've always viewed our IS team to enable the business strategy. And I think that's a wise way to approach things. And so by that approach, you have to stay engaged. You're part of the planning effort. You know what the expectations are, and then you're constantly providing feedback as to where your successes and challenges may be. What I think is interesting, and would ask Neil to also comment on, is these have been really challenging times, the last 12 plus months, specifically for healthcare. So Mick, you have a good view of multiple industries. And so to be able to battle through what I call, seemed like every week was a new chapter of the challenge, from just identifying and getting your analytics spin up and your frontline workers safe and cared for, all enabled by IS in some way, shape, or form, to eventually getting through testing and resurging back your surgeries and your volumes and people coming back to the hospitals, and ultimately getting to vaccines and dealing with the second wave and vaccines. If you're not an integral part of the senior leadership team, they're going to be not well informed. They're going to be poorly informed to make their business decisions. And so, how do you do it? You have to be present. You have to build trust. You have to have, it's hard. I think Neil's relatively new, and it's hard, to build up that confidence in the leadership. But those are the ways that we've done it.
Neil?
Yeah, I mean, I think Mike is spot on. The challenges really are making sure you are at the various tables, right? Because the planning is happening at all different levels. And over the last year, we basically had to suspend those flows that Mick is talking about, sorry, with all of that in process stuff we were normally slated to do, to shift gears, to move 7,000 back office workers to be remote, and to then find ways to actually repurpose entire units in the hospital that weren't meant to care for patients a certain way to now go to critical care units and all of that. And so these value streams are things that we were able to pivot and deliver very quickly, but we wouldn't have been able to do that if we weren't sitting at the table side by side with operations. So they understood what was involved in setting up a pop-up vaccine clinic now in a church, right? And all of the things that go with that. And part of our challenge is now trying to institutionalize some of those things, because we are now learning that this may be many of these things will have to be repeatable. So it's not like a one-off kind of event. So it's a very interesting time for us. We've learned a lot of things about how we work as teams. And I certainly think that looking forward, to Mick's point, how we're going to work for the next 12 months will be very interesting. I think it'll be different from how we've worked in the past. I like the idea of the overall value stream. I'm still struggling a little bit with how you really measure some of these things. Some things are very clear in terms of what you can track in your project management systems and other things, but other things I still struggle with. And particularly, I think Mike made the point of the drop-in kind of stuff that happens. How do you really react to that in a timely way? I believe we've got leadership's trust. IT has that, but I think leadership has also seen us deliver in tight timeframes and under pressure. And so it's adjusted that expectation to a certain level that sometimes people fear is unsustainable.
Mhm.
And so, I'd love to hear more from Mick about how the tools can be used to demonstrate that a little bit more clearly, because sometimes I feel like we're a victim of our own success.
And it's just so interesting, right? Is that I think leadership, the pandemic has actually helped get leadership more engaged, because, as you said, Mike, everything is moved very quickly. IS supported all of it, and what your teams did was some amazing work. And now Neil, that's right. I'm seeing this all over the place. It's this notion of being a victim of your own success. So yeah, I mean, my view on it is just to augment the project management tooling with value stream management tooling, and to help your teams understand the prioritization, that capacity, and in the end to keep an active discussion, and just to keep that frequency of discussion. Maybe it won't be weekly when everything was an emergency week to week, because that is unsustainable for the teams. I'm here in British Columbia in Canada, and last Friday I was on a call with teams who are, they're doing the immunization campaign, that all the information systems for that. They've worked 15-hour days, 7 days a week, and it was week 3. Right. And we know that's unsustainable, right? That they don't yet know the effects of that in terms of how the flow of those teams and their engagement will actually be affected post that, right? So I think it's now time to find that balance, and just to become very deliberate and data driven around it, because I think you've seen your teams just do amazing things, and now it's time to get to that to a sustainable and scalable level, and in a way where the business understands that capacity and can plan around it. So I think a lot of what you're doing is there, and it's just a matter of getting just more data into the decision making, is my view. So.
All right, well, we're running short on time, but I want to go to Mike for a final thought. Mike, you had mentioned some of the CIOs and former CIOs on the line. Obviously, it's an issue people are struggling with and working on and coming up with some solutions. And Mick and his organization have some tools to assist people. But your overall advice for those that maybe don't have as much experience as you do in dealing with this issue.
Yeah, I think perhaps the most important role for us as leaders is to pave the way for our staff and be there with our staff for them to successfully get their work completed. And as mentioned in this discussion, sometimes that means some tough discussions. That means putting some things to the side, but really leadership is representing your team and ensuring they can be successful. And if we can accomplish that, people work in healthcare for a variety of reasons, but the primary reason is they believe in the mission. They believe in giving something back and doing something a little bit above and beyond a quarterly dividend or financial report or whatever. And so they'll extend. And I know members of all of our teams are really proud when they say, I made the adjustments to that EMR to support the new ward that opened to support COVID patients, because that was better. We need to be paving the way for that. It doesn't involve a lot of technical acumen. It doesn't involve a lot of programmatic types of things, but it does involve leadership and paving that way and let folks do what they do best, and that's deliver.
Well said, Mike. Thank you so much. Regarding continuing education, you can use the final slide in this deck. You will get an email when the on-demand recording of this event is ready. If you want to sponsor an event with us, you can reach out to Nancy Wilcox from our team. You go to our website to register for upcoming webinars. With that, I want to thank our panel. This has been a tremendous conversation. We covered a lot of area. I think it's been extremely valuable. Mike Restuccia, Neil Ganguly, and Mick Kirsten. I want to thank Tasktop for making this event possible, and I want to thank our attendees for coming. With that, everybody have a wonderful day. Thank you.